Turns out, I can be a very critical person a lot of the time. Two of my biggest series last year were dedicated entirely to tearing two horrible stories to shreds. And let me assure you, I still have plans for even more series of that type coming to a YouTube video near you later this year. But despite what you may think about me based on some of my most recent analysis videos, I do love a lot of games for a lot of reasons. But I don't often get the chance to talk about them because of the games I typically cover on the channel. But today, we're gonna carve out some time to focus on the positives for a change, and highlight the best of the best that video games have to offer. Last week, I went over the 20 worst games I ever played, and today, to act as a counterbalance to that video, I'll be counting off the 20 best games I ever played. Of course, if you know me, you already know a few games that are guaranteed to make an appearance here today. In fact, you may already know more than a few of them. But I still have some surprises to throw your way today. Games I've always secretly loved but never had a reason to bring up naturally in any of my videos or streams, games I may have referenced once or twice but not often enough to stick in people's memories, or possibly even games that I once confidently rejected from this list that have since snuck their way into a very special place in my heart. So be sure to stick around and see what I have to say. Just like with my top 20 worst video, I am restricting myself to only talking about one game per series, and I won't be using things like the Master Chief Collection or Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney Trilogy to circumvent that rule. I have to commit to one specific individual title. Though before I get to the main attraction, I first want to go over a few honorable mentions that I didn't have the heart to leave out of this video entirely. Probably the simplest mechanics out of any game in this video. You slice blocks. That's all there is to it, but that's all that it needs. There's a mesmerizing fluidity to the slicing to the point where you almost don't even have to look at the arrows because of how naturally the movements lead into one another, combined with impactful sound effects to nail that satisfaction you get from slicing them. And it goes without saying that the soundtrack is phenomenal, as it kinda has to be for a rhythm game. The base game songs are catchy and upbeat. The officially licensed DLC songs add even more flavor to the mix. And of course, there's custom songs. There's nothing left to say because the mechanics are really that simple, but it is such a blast to slice to the beat of some awesome songs. I wish they'd stop changing the UI because the UI always has to change in games nowadays. But the core gameplay is phenomenal, and I can and have played this for hours on end. It's a ton of fun, and it gives you one hell of a workout as well. Look, it's not some groundbreaking racing game, but it's still pretty fun to play. It's kind of a middle ground between a go-kart racer and a more realistic one like Forza. It's got more grounded controls than Mario Kart, but without the hyper-realism and required braking precision of Forza. You can either follow the main story or just drive around the open world and explore Radiator Springs, Ornament Valley, and Tailfin Pass to your heart's content. I spent so much time as a kid literally just driving around and enjoying the sights during the day, evening, and nighttime. There's fun little minigames along the way, small-scale road races, and grandiose piston cup races. Is it incredible? No, but there's a lot of fun to be had here, and I still revisit it from time to time. And apparently you guys really like this one. A work of pure genius from beginning to end for reasons that I can't say because of spoilers. Granted, I don't think there's anyone watching this that doesn't know what the game is all about, but even if there's just a 1% chance I'm wrong, I don't want to risk ruining it for anybody. Endearing characters, a beautiful art style, and wonderfully catchy tunes all pull you along during the ride until things start going horribly awry. Take my word for it, you don't want to miss this one if you somehow have avoided it for almost 5 years. Just don't play the Plus version. There's a lot of cool bonus stuff for fans of the game, like side stories, additional artwork, and a music player along with brand new tracks, but the manner in which this version of the game presents itself can very easily ruin the experience if you get just a little bit curious on the main menu and apply the slightest bit of deductive reasoning. So take my word for it. Play the free version on Steam, and then if you like it, buy the Plus version afterwards to experience the bonus content. An absolutely beautiful game. Conceptually, it sounds boring. You're just walking around the wilderness. But that's a testament to the breathtaking atmosphere and exceptional voice work from the two main stars that sells this experience. Because fundamentally, it is a walking simulator. But I was jumping at the bit to explore every last inch of the forest, and the writers did an incredible job of making you connect with Henry and Delilah in just the opening minutes of the game. The backstory of this location and the history of the characters that get slowly pushed into the spotlight the further the game goes on had me enriched from start to finish, with two moments in particular being so haunting they sent chills down my spine. It's a slow burn, haha, funny because fire, but the payoff is 100% worth it when you finally get there. One of the best story-driven experiences I've ever played. I absolutely love the atmosphere here. The soothing music in the background acts as a comforting sound to contrast against the ominous lightning and storm sound effects booming outside. The house is simultaneously warm and inviting as well as foreboding and mysterious. Exploring the rooms and listening to the diary entries is calming and heartwarming, while venturing into the sealed-off parts of the house gives you this looming sense of dread and uncertainty. It's so hard for me to articulate what it is about this setting that works so well, but it's magnificent. And the game gives you the freedom to explore at your own pace. There's no linear list of rooms you need to explore in a certain order, no directional arrows or objective markers or anything like that. Just you and an empty house after your sister and parents mysteriously vanished while you were overseas. And now it's up to you to find the clues and solve the mystery of where they went. I love it. I absolutely adore it. Investigating every room at my own pace in the order I chose, and putting together the pieces to uncover the truth behind why everyone left was more satisfying than I could have ever expected. I was fully immersed in this world from the moment I stepped through the doors to the moment I read the final diary entry, and I had the biggest smile on my face when the credits rolled. If you're not a fan of slow-paced, story-driven games, then this definitely won't be for you. But if you like to slow down and immerse yourself into a deep, enriching narrative with beautifully compelling atmosphere, endearing characters, and a total lack of linearity in its design, then this is right up your alley. Alright, look, I know you probably just rolled your eyes at this one, so let's get the obvious stuff out of the way first. Does Until Dawn have its campy moments? Yes. Is it some horrifying masterpiece? No. But I did find myself tensing up and holding my breath for plenty of moments. It's nice that choices actually have significance in terms of which characters survive. The atmosphere is simultaneously beautiful and intriguing as well as frigid and nerve-wracking. And I really like the characters, with noteworthy exceptions.
Matt, I need my bag. It was just a prank, Han.
I know it's not some pinnacle of the horror genre, but I loved watching the characters do their thing and was on the edge of my seat for plenty of sequences throughout the game. Rush of Blood, meanwhile, came very close to making the top 20. I replayed it to record footage for this video and genuinely forgot just how much fun it was to play. Horror in VR gives a very visceral feel that can't quite be described verbally, and the gunplay is really solid as well. Plus, VR rollercoaster sections. What could go wrong? Alright, now that we've made our way through the honorable mentions, let's finally get on to the proper top 20. Considering what landed in the #1 spot for my worst ranking, it was inevitable that a game from this series would end up on the list. And if I have to choose only one, then Five Nights at Freddy's VR Help Wanted will take the cake. And no, I don't consider this to be breaking my rule of no collections allowed on the list, because while it may contain remakes of the original FNAF games, it's still an entirely new build and original creation from Steel Wool Studios. This is a love letter to this series in the purest form of the phrase. It faithfully recreated the mechanics from the original 4 FNAF games, even a few from Sister Location, without making any of them feel cumbersome to control in VR. On top of that, they also crafted brand new minigames specifically for Help Wanted, and they are the shining stars of the experience. They aren't just riding on the success of the original games where the design was already done, and all they had to do was translate the blueprint into VR. The best parts of Help Wanted are the minigames custom made by Steel Wool themselves. Parts and services as you perform a maintenance repair on the 4 main animatronics. And while it's technically just a game of Simon Says, that doesn't make getting up close and personal with these menacing animatronics any less nerve-wracking, especially when something goes wrong and the stakes are raised drastically, or when they're actively moving while you're repairing them, or something gets loose and runs freely throughout the room with no way of knowing where they ran off to. Vent Repair may just be the most terrifying game of the bunch due to how claustrophobic it is, and being in these vents puts you right up next to the animatronics, which would be horrifying in and of itself, but combining these tight quarters with having to actually repair the vents while fending off any threats coming towards you, both of which pull your attention in 2 separate directions, leaves you in a perpetual state of anxiety of what lies beyond your field of vision, crafting the most pulse-pounding challenge of of the game. Trick or Treat is a neat memory and spatial awareness test with a haunting sense of anticipation for whether you accurately deduced who will be waiting for you at the door. Pirate Adventure is a fun Space Ranger spin style shoot 'em up game with some horrifying secrets waiting to be found. The list goes on and on with what Sealwell has added to this game. And that's not even mentioning the fundamental impact of experiencing all of this in virtual reality. There are no words to properly describe what it feels like to physically be in these offices and feel how trapped and powerless you are. To see the menacing animatronics towering over you, walking by just outside your door, or crawling through the vents towards you. You're no longer changing between static images on your monitor. These are physical, three-dimensional entities walking through the building to hunt you down. No verbal explanation or visual gameplay demo can ever convey the visceral horror you feel when you experience all this in virtual reality, where you can't just look away from your screen to get away from the horrors that await you. This was also a very important game for the studio that made it, because it was the first ever FNAF game not to have been developed by Scott Cawthon. And to be honest, many people, myself included, were not convinced that anybody else would have the intimate knowledge of what made these games work so well, and passion for the series needed to successfully carry it into the future. But I was completely blown away by how respectful and comprehensive this game ended up being, in what is easily the most terrifying and fun game of the bunch. FNAF VR was a knockout debut game for the series from Steelwool Studios, and reassured me that Five Nights at Freddy's was in careful, loving, and competent hands moving forward. Right? Is anyone really surprised that this game ended up here in some capacity? So obviously there's the personal element involved in this place. You all know what Toy Story means to me. I made a 6-hour-long series that was born out of my passion for the movies and how everything I loved about them was destroyed in approximately 89 minutes. I'll never forget the day I saw this movie for the first time as a kid. June 18th, 2010, the first showing of the day. They literally had to open the theater for us and the others that were there for the first showing. And after bawling my eyes out as a child in the theater, I came home to find out that my parents had bought this for me as a surprise. Disney had a habit of releasing their movie tie-in games a few days before the movie itself, and it was waiting for me once we got home. And thus, the rest of my day was lost to nothing but this game, and I loved every minute of it. Being able to explore this world from the films, or even just make my own world with characters I love, never ceases to be a fun time. Yes, obviously there's a bit of a personal reason why I love this game so much, but even putting that aside, it's still a genuinely great game. Movie tie-ins don't often have a great reputation because trying to tell the same story across two different mediums almost never works out well, but Toy Story 3's story mode is actually surprisingly good. It doesn't strictly follow the events of the movie 100% of the time, which allows a lot of creative liberty, focusing first and foremost on making a fun game to play. What will often happen when a game is so focused on replicating the story from the movie is that it will force arbitrary gameplay into sections it doesn't really work for, but that is not the case for Toy Story 3. Every second of the main story mode, except for the final battle, is a super fun ride, even if it sometimes deviates from the movie to some extent. But the real spotlight of the game is the Toy Box mode, which is an open-world Toy Story adventure that has absolutely no right to be as good as it is. Building, managing, customizing your own town, expanding to other regions, helping out residents of adjacent neighborhoods, exploring unique worlds themed around characters from the movies, completing quests for people, or even just messing around in an open world, there is endless fun to be had here, even if you're not a Toy Story fan. Even if you have no idea who these characters are, you will have a blast using Woody, Buzz, and Jesse's unique character abilities to solve puzzles and navigate your way through the story, as well as exploring the Toy Box mode to your heart's content. But if you are a Toy Story fan, then it is the absolute dream game to play. Remember when LEGO games were good? Yeah, I remember. And oh, how I long for the days when these games were even half as good as LEGO Indiana Jones. A game that serves as an eternal reminder of a simpler time. A time when there wasn't an overemphasis on making things intensely cinematic to railroad you down a linear path. A time when they weren't trying to cram every type of gameplay under the sun they possibly could into a single game. A time when the scope wasn't blown way out of proportion under the false pretense that bigger means better. And a time when they had significantly more faith in your intelligence. There's no condescending dialogue explaining to you how to solve puzzles, no deliberate camera angles showing you where to go unless a boss spawns in, no artificial restrictions on where you can go, nothing. Just a casual, fun game where you can run around iconic Indiana Jones environments, bashing everything in sight, solving engaging puzzles to get through the main game, and find all the hidden artifact pieces and puzzles, and watch a lighthearted take on the main beats of the trilogy's story without omitting major noteworthy events or losing the impactful tone of important scenes. You got that, LEGO Indiana Jones 2? What more is there to say? We've all played LEGO games before. We all know the simple joy these games provide, whether you're familiar with the IP in question or not. I just wish the Traveler's Tales also knew that, so we could start getting LEGO games that are even half as good as these original adventures instead of schlop like this. LEGO Indiana Jones The Original Adventures was the first LEGO game I ever played. It was my introduction to the Indiana Jones movies, and is easily the best one of the bunch that never gets old no matter how many times I play through it. So, of all the games I'm going to talk about on my list today, this one will probably baffle you the most, because a video game based on Over the Hedge has no right to be as good as it is, but this is genuinely a lot of fun to play. It's got platforming mechanics that are surprisingly smooth as hell, with tight controls and satisfying chains of jumps to pull off across all the levels. It's got fast-paced, intense combat encounters where each character brings their own unique skill set to the table, and their strengths can be combined for dynamic, ultra-powerful moves. You can mix and match your character party before going into any of the levels, and doing so will not only change how you play, but also offers brand new dialogue that's written in such a way that no matter which characters you bring, the flow of conversation is completely natural. It never feels like a character is reacting to a different line that wasn't said. Yet it's not so bland that all humor and wit is sapped of their personalities to try to make the dialogue work for 3 different possible conversations. And the multiplayer mode has some really fun as hell party games to play with friends and family. Bumper cars with golf carts, speed racers, driving ranges, it's just a blast to play. And the single player mode takes you through a diverse array of locations to explore where each heist has its own set of cool mechanics and objectives to complete. And even the plot is pretty decent. Of course, it's nowhere near as good as the movie itself. If you're looking for a gripping, emotional, and hilarious adventure on par with the story of the film, you most decidedly will not find that here. But it still puts forth a high-stakes scenario that gets you invested and serves as an alright follow-up to the story from the film. And the humor is most certainly not lacking. Look, I know this seems like a strange pick, especially considering some screenshots of character models that tend to circulate around the internet, but Over the Hedge is genuinely a lot of fun to play, especially with a buddy, and I highly recommend it even if you've never seen the movie. So, I'm gonna be blunt with this one by saying that you are not going to believe me when I tell you what game has earned spot number 16. You're going to think I'm trolling you, or you might think I've suffered from an unfortunate cranial accident recently. But I promise you, I am not trying to pull one over on you when I say... that Persona 5 Royal is now one of my favorite games of all time.
Wait, didn't you say that?
Look, it's not one of my favorite games of all time. It's definitely not cracking my top 10. Probably even my top 20 games of all time. Yeah, I know what I said. You wanna know what else I said? As of the time I'm recording this, I went to the theater to go see Toy Story 4 3 days ago. The movie itself is not that bad, right? It's, as a movie, like plot-wise, it's fairly airtight. The first declarative statement of quality a person says about a piece of media is not the only thing they are ever allowed to say about it. The more time you have to think about any given movie, game, etc., the greater the potential for more issues or points of praise to come to fruition. For instance, Toy Story 4 is a movie that gets worse and worse every time you think about it. On the other end of the spectrum, I have noticed even more details about Halo Infinite that made me realize it's even more brilliantly written than I thought the first time around, as is the case with Persona 5 Royal. Not because I've suddenly tricked myself into thinking the game is any fun to play post Futaba's Palace. Okumura is nothing but pain and suffering, Sei's Casino is tedious, Shido's Boat even more so, Mementos is a slog, although fighting Josh Cooley is admittedly pretty cool, and I don't even want to talk about the nightmare fuel that is Maruki's Palace. And it's also not because I've become any less annoyed by the contrivance present in several major instances throughout the story, but because, and I'm sure this will come as no surprise to any of you, of how much I fell in love with this family of Phantom Thieves. At the end of the day, in a story-driven experience, characters are what matter above all else. And for all this game's faults, of which there are plenty, it was a universe I always looked forward to returning to each day I sat down to record it. For as cheesy as it may sound for me to say, it almost felt like a second life with how comprehensive its mechanics are. There's practically no limitations placed upon who you can spend time with and where you can do it, and I was always actively invested in getting to know every one of them on a more intimate level, even if I had no idea how literal that mission would become. And for as much as the palace design starts to tank as soon as you get to Okumura. For the first half, the pacing of alternating between fast-paced JRPG battles and slower-paced, story-heavy sequences with character bonding and, for lack of a better term, life simulation worked wonders at keeping me hooked throughout the entire 130-hour adventure. And that's the core of this game. The story of this group of misfits banding together to change the hearts of the most corrupt in their society alongside their more grounded, personal, individual struggles. It's what motivated me to keep coming back for more and what helped me push through the rest of the sludge. It may have taken a playthrough of Persona 5 Strikers, which essentially sidelined the Phantom Thieves in their own game, for me to realize it, but I came away from Persona 5 Royal having fallen in love with these characters and empathizing with their journeys, and look forward to replaying it on my own in the future, but at a much, much slower pace so I can really take the time to soak in every last bit of what this game has to offer. I just hope I can find a way to brace for this bullshit again. My all-time favorite Mario Kart game. There are others in the series that are technically objectively better than it, but my love for Mario Kart Wii is undying. It's got my favorite selection of new tracks with back-to-back awesomeness in the Flower and Star Cup, and a phenomenal collection of retro courses that served as part of my motivation to want to check out the classic Mario Kart games. And while that was certainly not a painless ride, it also led me to checking out plenty of other fun courses along the way. The handling of the karts is tight as hell, only outstripped by Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Even using the Wii wheel is seamless, which is not something that can be said for all motion control driven games. Hell, even just the replay feature was fun to use. Something I do as a kid was commentate over the replay like I was a sportscaster. So I guess you could say this game was my first foray into the world of commentating over video games. And if you'll allow me to share a personal story, when my grandmother moved out of state when I was a kid, this was a game we played online to stay connected. In fact, it was the first online game I ever played. While she was away, we would race together online, even if helping her connect online was bit of a process. It was still a way for us to stay in touch and have a fun time doing so, even while she was 1,000 miles away. And whether I'm racing by myself or against friends and family, this game never fails to provide me with fun, intense races on courses I keep coming back to again and again. And had the online servers never been shut down, you can bet I would still be playing on them to this day. I'm not typically a fan of stealth games. The closest I ever got was playing the Truth and Reconciliation in Halo Combat Evolved. More often than not, I find stealth games to be way too slow-paced and laborious for my liking. But there's something special about the Budget Cuts duology that effortlessly managed to pull me in, and that's probably due to the medium of being a virtual reality game. You feel a lot sneakier and more immersed when you can physically duck below windows to avoid detection, and move behind cover objects and crawl through the vents. There's not just one way to play. If you want to go super stealth mode and try to circumvent your way around all the bots, you can. Or if you want to do a completionist run it and try to methodically take out every single enemy that stands in your way, you can do that as well. Both playstyles encourage you to strategize and think about your best movement patterns and enemy prioritization, in addition to puzzle solving to deduce what you have to do next to accomplish your objectives. And it's all topped off with a charming art style, endearing character dialogue, and neat world building present in documents hidden across the various offices and in speeches coming over the loudspeakers. But of course, I have to abide by my rule. Only one of these two games can win. It's really hard to pick between the two because much like the Greatest Attorney Chronicles, they are two pieces of one larger overarching story and are essentially two halves of one game. But with all things considered, I'm probably gonna go with the second game, Mission Insolvency. It expanded the scope beyond the typical office environments and into the wider world beyond Transcorp. The bow and arrow added new strategies and combat opportunities for taking down robots, and it raises the stakes through the roof, with this being the climax of the story, facing off against the toughest bots they can possibly throw your way, with the final showdown testing everything you learned throughout both Budget Cuts adventures. I've replayed this duology more times than I can count because they are tense as hell stealth games, terrifying horror games, and pulse-pounding action games, all tied together with an epic story about saving the world from robot overlords. They are easily some of the best VR games I've ever played, but there's still one virtual reality adventure that manages to beat it out. The perfect game to play to relax after a long, stressful day. And that's the best way to describe this game. Relaxing. There is a storyline to follow and progression to make, but if you just want to mess around the 3 different locations, trying out all the different activities, or just relaxing in your resort room, you absolutely can. Cooking, sandcastle making, splashing around in the water, volleyball, painting, gardening, river rafting, ice sculpting, knitting, puzzle solving, snowball fights, the list of what you can do in this game goes on and on. It's the ultimate experience for just messing around with VR physics refined to a T and taking your mind off everything for a bit while soothing musical tracks delight your eardrums in the background, and you can get completely completely absorbed in the gorgeous atmosphere of Vacation Island. Or if you're looking for something a bit more adventurous, then you can sail across the sea and dive below in search of buried treasure, go on a hike through the woods to witness a magnificent geyser, or scale to the top of a mountain in search of a magnificent view, culminating in a free-for-all dance party where you can show off your dance moves to all the bots. It's got the free-spirited, relaxing, open-ended vacation mode, and the more linear, structured back-to-job mode for those who miss the classic job simulator feel. You have the relaxing activities to engage with if you just want to kick back and have some casual fun, and the more story-driven, exhilarating elements for those interested in the narrative of the simulation and itching for an adventure, as well as the opportunity to throw the party of a lifetime. It's a game I can always come back to after a particularly stressful day and feel perfectly at peace within minutes of booting it up. One of the most powerful video game experiences of all time. It is so hard for me to figure out how to recommend this game because there's almost no way to give it the praise it deserves without diving into heavy spoilers. Conceptually, here's what the game's all about. A narrator named Davey Wreden, writer of the Stanley Parable, is going to take you on a journey through a series of video games developed by his friend called Coda. And while you adventure through every game that he made, you attempt to figure out what kind of person Coda is and why, one day, he mysteriously stops developing games. And that's it. That's all I can tell you without ruining this masterpiece for you, because to reveal anything else about the narrative or its characters would be to give too much away and rob you of its emotional weight. I was honestly hesitant to tell you as much as I did. The narration is grounded to perfectly pull you into the world within the opening prologue. Each new game you explore offers new insight to the deeper story at play, and it has you wrapped right around its finger for all the emotional beats, only to rip you right out of it at the most optimal time for your heart to shatter. Something that the music, atmosphere, and general sound design all work together to masterfully accomplish. I wish I could say more. I wish I could sit here for 2 hours and break down every last second of this game's script and why it all works so well on multiple levels and how it appeals to so many different topics with the respect and appropriate time dedicated to them. But that is as spoiler-free as I can get about it. So please, play this game. Every single person can play the beginner's guide and take away something profoundly meaningful. But the people for which this will most strongly resonate is anyone who works in any kind of creative field. But whether or not you're an artist, this is an absolute must-play title. It's $9.99 on Steam, and it lasts anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half to 2 hours, depending on how much time you take to soak in the atmosphere and explore every last corner of these magnificent worlds. I have a lot of great memories associated with the games on this list, and they all mean a lot to me. But no game I've ever played has ever had such a profound and emotionally powerful impact on me that left me utterly speechless by the ending, and that I still take away new meaning from upon every subsequent replay. The rightful winner of 2021's Game of the Year award. The way I always describe this game to people is to say that it's just a massive burst of creativity. There's a seemingly never-ending stream of things to do, both throughout the main story, as well as off the golden path that are just there to mess around with that reward exploration. Even if it's something as simple as a rhythm game, this is the perfect type of hidden objective to find in a co-op driven experience. Competitive minigames to battle against your friend and that serve as a great pace breaker from the larger scale of the main adventure. The most impressive thing about It Takes Two is the sheer variety of not only environments, but gameplay types. While the seamlessly satisfying movements remain unchanged throughout the game, it's not content to just throw one gameplay mechanic your way. Each new chapter gives you and your partner a brand new toy to play with and forces you both to use each other's strengths and weaknesses to work together as a team to solve the puzzles and cross the platform challenges the game throws your way. And it would have been so easy for all these things to be half-baked. A classic example of quantity over quality where they were more interested in reaching a number of mechanics rather than how fun they were to use. But every level is tuned to perfection. There's a fine line to walk between bouncing around gameplay types too often to truly enjoy and get immersed in any of them, and sticking around any one of them for too long to the point where the mechanic or environment gets stale and you just want to move on. But It Takes Two walks that line to perfection from start to finish without fail. And these boss battles are possibly the best parts of the game, putting your individual skill and teamwork abilities to the ultimate test. I cannot properly express to you how satisfying it is to work together with your partner with on-point strategizing and communication to accomplish tremendous feats in these high-stakes situations. It Takes Two is an exhilarating adventure that gets your heart pounding and melting at all the right moments. So grab a friend, significant other, or family member and play this game together with them. It is an experience you'll both remember forever. the epitome of the perfect sequel. The first Portal was such a simple premise with a very light story, providing just enough of a narrative to justify the gameplay, and Valve managed to take that paper-thin plot and build off of it tenfold by expanding the characters and world building like no sequel I have ever seen. All the voice actors do a stellar job with their roles, and Ellen McLean's performance as GLaDOS is even more exemplary than the first game. There's so much more depth to her as a character. The way she bounces off Wheatley is hilarious and gripping once certain plot beats are revealed. Wheatley himself is a laugh-out-loud companion throughout almost the entire game, while simultaneously knowing when to treat something as no laughing matter, as well as being the shining example of this type of character that stories like Halo 5, Frozen, Big Hero 6, Zootopia, and so on and so forth should learn from. And with only a single voice, plus the occasional one-liner from Carolyn, Cave Johnson is able to take you on a journey through the entire rise and fall of Aperture Science leading to where you are today without feeling overly expository thanks to masterful voice acting and perfect visual pacing with environmental storytelling to match what you're hearing about. For anyone who hasn't played Portal 2, which is a problem you need to rectify immediately, I'll leave the rest for you to discover on your own, because the main story is a masterpiece, and the hidden lore you can uncover in the Ratman dens as well as the other secret areas only further adds to the complexity of this universe. It's just the cherry on top that the core gameplay mechanics are all fleshed out and easy to understand but hard to master. The puzzles are all phenomenally well designed with introductions that ease you into things at just the right pace so you never feel too overwhelmed. The difficulty curve is refined to a T, and almost all the challenge comes from figuring out what the solutions are. There's never an instance of, oh, you placed the portal 1 inch off from where it needed to be, therefore you fail, because the game will offer ever so subtle assistance in that regard so you don't get caught up in the minutiae of it all and can focus solely on the thought process of solving them. Puzzle games do not typically have a great replay value because once you know solutions, that's it. That's the game. The problem-solving process from your original playthrough is lost forever and cannot be replicated on subsequent playthroughs. But the story, characters, world building, and cinematic presentation are all so out of this world that I have replayed the story mode countless times just for that alone. Not even mentioning that the co-op campaign is almost as good as a single-player mode. I've also replayed this countless times whenever any one of my friends buys the game, and we always have a blast tearing through it. If you love puzzle games and you love a great story, then it goes without saying Portal 2 will be right up your alley. And now that the companion collection has been announced, none of you have an excuse anymore. Possibly the placement that will confuse you the most. Not because people think this is a bad game. From what I understand, the general reception of Captain Toad Treasure Tracker is pretty positive, but because I never see it get talked about at all, which is a shame because I genuinely love this game. It's not just good or okay, it's amazing. It's filled with beautiful, colorful, and varied environments that already looked incredible on the Wii U and look even better on the Switch. Gameplay-wise, it shows off super creative and thoughtful puzzle mechanics that offer a good challenge all throughout. Of course, since the game is obviously targeted at a younger demographic, the puzzles aren't going to be anywhere near the same difficulty as something like Turing Test, which is undoubtedly the most challenging puzzle game I've ever played, but it still manages to hold your attention. There's a very narrow line to walk between managing to keep it simple enough for young kids to be able to figure out while still being difficult enough to keep adults engaged, and it strikes that balance absolutely perfectly. Of course, not every level is a gym, and there's the occasional dud, but I'd say that 95% of the levels are really well designed, challenging, and fun to play. I was a little worried about how some of the gameplay-specific mechanics would be implemented on the Switch, but I'm happy to say that you'd never be able to tell it was originally a Wii U title with how seamless this port is. And 1,001 thank yous for making the Mummy Me Maze Forever not borderline impossible on the Switch. This thing was the stuff nightmares are made of on the Wii U. Overall, Captain Toad Treasure Tracker is an incredible puzzle game for audiences young and old. You know something? Somehow, against all odds, I managed to stay 100% blind to this game for 3 years, with the only 2 exceptions being a reveal that happens in the first 5 minutes, and this gauntlet. Despite how much this game absolutely dominated the internet in 2015, I was completely oblivious to the story beats, characters, and gameplay. And I am so happy I managed to stay spoiler-free until the day I finally sat down to see what all the hype was about, because I was absolutely floored by Undertale. Usually with story-driven games, there's at least one character that I just absolutely despise with a fiery passion. I don't know if you've been able to tell that given my recent playthroughs. But with Undertale, I didn't hate any of the characters. It's an all-star cast where everyone gets their time on the spotlight with substantive development all on their own, and then their arcs finally get to cross over with each other in the game's final act. The world building and backstory was gripping and emotionally moving. The gameplay offered a creative battle method where you have to figure out the right series of moves to be able to spare them alongside fast-paced, tense bullet hell sections, and the characters were all endearing even when they were actively trying to kill you. Sans' boss battle still stands to this day as the most satisfying gaming achievement I've ever had, alongside the likes of the Perfect Run, and managing to conquer Escharum and the Harbinger on Legendary on my first try. Yes, I'm going to ride that high forever, get over it. If by some miracle you've avoided spoilers for this game for over 6 years, it's a no-brainer. See, this is where my only one game per series thing is really biting me in the ass, because I so desperately just want to put the entire Walking Dead Telltale series in this slot to encapsulate Clementine's entire journey from start to finish. But I'm sticking to my guns, and after a significant amount of time spent contemplating this point, I've decided to nominate the final season, because it was the final step of Clementine's almost decade-long journey over the course of these games, where her story had come full circle and she was all grown up, having come so far since the first day in that treehouse. The concept of finally finding a home you have to give everything you've got to defend after years of running, as well as Clem finding a group that was all around her age as opposed to being the one kid surrounded by a bunch of adults who she outclassed in every single way in every single situation, was the perfect way to create high stakes for the final season. And after a slew of Telltale games that had strayed further and further away from the choice-based adventure games they were originally supposed to be, the emphasis on more free-roaming environments with more optional character moments as well as more branching paths was a breath of fresh air compared to a new frontier. Each character was empathetic and well developed, with even the ones that rubbed me the wrong way initially ultimately winning me over by the end. The story was perfectly paced and managed to hit emotional beats not seen since the early days of The Walking Dead, and Clem got the happy ending she always deserved but we were terrified for years she was never going to get. I played each of The Walking Dead games during a very significant moment in my life, and in much the same way that Clementine grew up throughout her Walking Dead adventures, I felt like I grew up alongside her from playing the original 2 seasons as a kid, the 3rd season as a teenager, and the final season of my late teen years as I started to become an adult. I, along with millions of people around the world, felt intensely emotionally attached to Clementine's story and was over the moon excited when Skybound stepped up to the plate to finish what Telltale started, and was a complete and total emotional wreck when the credits finally rolled on her story. This series is the roller coaster of a lifetime that serves as a capstone of Telltale's legacy, a symbol of my life as I grew up throughout the years, and a golden standard with some of the best storytelling video games have to offer. Out-of-this-world adventure in every way imaginable. It takes everything that made the first game great and makes it even better. It features the same creative, gravity-centric platforming and same tight movement and controls, and just gives you the same phenomenal base system but with better level design and more toys to play around with, from things as simple as new power-ups to the addition of Yoshi as a playable character, who also has his own set of unique power-ups to equip. It's a proper expansion of the first game that doesn't make any unnecessary tweaks to the formula that the first game excelled with, alongside great quality of life improvements. To list just a few of them, the game actually announces when a Praxis comet flies in instead of forcing you to go check the board to see if anything popped up, as well as not forcing you to immediately complete them, as well as not actually disappearing if you don't do it immediately. You don't have to wait until the end of the game to play as Luigi. You get a better sense of progress by flying through an actual world map that changes with each new world as opposed to being stuck in Comet Observatory the whole time. There's a much better variety of levels, both in terms of aesthetics and design as opposed to the copy-pasted retread in the second half of the first game, and the end game content is infinitely better thanks to an entire other world as opposed to spamming a bunch of purple coin missions, which were a pain in the ass to find that one last coin you missed tucked away in the corner of the galaxy, and green stars that are a much more interesting scavenger hunt to find than literally just playing the entire game again, but this time as Luigi. Nintendo capitalized on every available opportunity to improve the Galaxy experience and nailed every aspect of it, which is why it will permanently aggravate me to no end that it seems to be the one 3D Mario game Nintendo just refuses to show even the slightest bit of love. This should have been a part of 3D All-Stars, goddammit! Maybe someday Nintendo will come to their senses, but until then, this game still stands today as the one game keeping me from selling my Wii U, which is some pretty damn high praise. Alright, I admit it, I only bought this game initially because of the art style. I knew absolutely nothing about Cuphead going into it, but I was just so mesmerized by the visuals that I was down to play just about anything to see what it was going to be. It goes without saying that the superficial elements are outstanding. Not just the art style itself, the graphical detail and color palette for the characters and environments, as well as the fluid, bouncy animations all sell the world, and the music is just as good as the art. But if that was all the game had going for it, I wouldn't have it in my top 5 games of all time. Cuphead is genuinely a ton of fun to play. With the exception of a few of the run and gun levels, all the bosses are exceptionally well designed in that every one of their attacks is something that can be learned and accounted for. There was a point in the game's history where Rumor Honeybottom's minions and projectiles could kill you off screen, but ever since that was passed, the balancing of the bosses has literally been perfect. My first playthrough was brutal to get through, but there was never a moment during any of the bosses where I felt like the game was cheating me. I always knew exactly where I went wrong and how to fix it for the next attempt. Each boss has its own creative attacks and fight strategies. None of them blend together visually or mechanically, with the possible exception of some of the plain levels. There's many different ways to play, depending on which shots and charms you equip, so you can play to your strengths. It's a joyous ride from start to finish, and I am thrilled that we are now months away from finally getting more of this game. The final act of Phoenix's journey throughout the original trilogy, and what an epic finale at that. Trials and Tribulations easily has the best selection of cases out of those first 3 games. It comes out swinging by having you play as the legendary Mia Fey not once, but twice, laying the groundwork for the deeper mystery by defending Phoenix in one and facing off against Edgeworth in another, allowing 2 undefeated champions to do battle in court. Even the standard cases with Phoenix are exceptional, with the Stolen Turnabout featuring one of the most ingenious villains and plot twists in the series, as well as some of my favorite one-off characters, and Recipe for Turnabout featuring one of the smartest final turnabouts, both of which are tangentially related to the overarching story either conceptually or in execution, and the worst you can get from this game is a great case. And it all leads to Bridge to the Turnabout, which is the embodiment of what Ace Attorney can be when it's firing on all cylinders, tying together every last loose plot thread and character arc across those original games and bringing them together for one final showdown against the most formidable villains yet. It's just a massive case of payoff after payoff. If there's one word to describe this game, it's payoffs. For every character and every story beat, for characters new and old, as every single main character throughout the trilogy gets a proper send-off and reaches a happy ending as the culmination of their journey, making this last image of our heroes standing side by side one of the most endearing and heartwarming images in the series. The final set of trials are magnificent, and they all still send chills down my spine. From exposing the truth behind Iris and Dahlia to watching her spirit fly out of Maya's body to the final showdown against Godot with Maya on the witness stand struggling to figure out what the right thing to do is, and this marvelous shot, the finale to this game, and in turn the entire trilogy, is unforgettable in every way imaginable, being both logically coherent and exceptionally emotionally satisfying. I came very close to placing Infinite in this slot instead. The fact that it was even in contention at all is commendable, especially given the efforts it takes to fix the mistakes of the past, both in terms of story and gameplay, which may or may not be a video in and of itself currently in production, and the fact that Infinite's cutscenes are among the best and most emotionally powerful of the entire series. But at the end of the day, I don't think anything is ever truly going to be able to dethrone Halo 3. The level design is completely open-ended with endless ways to approach every encounter. Each one stands out with unique gameplay opportunities and visual theming. The weapon sandbox is pure perfection, where every weapon has its uses and can be used effectively for certain situations. And equipment is the best fourth pillar to the golden triangle that's ever been added, where every single piece has their strengths and weaknesses and can be used in an infinite number of ways. They aren't so ultra specific in their functionality that there's only ever one way to use them, and I still think of new ways to make these things work every time I play through it. They're extremely versatile, so the player can get creative to find new ways to approach the battle. battles. And enemies can use the equipment as well. They can use a power drain to counter a deployable cover you've thrown, or a regenerator to counter your power drain, etc. It's not like Halo Reach where you're provided specific armor abilities for specific circumstances. The game hands you the tools and lets you use your imagination because the levels are designed around them all so they can be used creatively without breaking the levels. There's almost always a team of Marines with you, which contributes to you feeling that grand scope and massive scale of this final battle for the original Halo trilogy, and the sense of camaraderie of fighting alongside your allies as you arm them with powerful weapons and watch them absolutely wreak havoc is unparalleled. And don't even get me started on the epic Scarab battles. Completely dynamic and unique battles in stark contrast to the mind-numbing scripted behavior of present in Halo 2. Halo 3 is the perfect conclusion to every single character arc and plot beat from this original trilogy of games. The original story of the Covenant and the Great Journey, the Gravemind and the Flood, the Arbiter's Crisis of Belief, Chief and Cortana's development, the growing camaraderie between the members of the UNSC, they all reach such a satisfying conclusion to their stories. There's so many payoffs and callbacks, both big and small, all leading to the brilliant climax and resolution of the story that brings everything full circle, from going back to the original Halo ring and control room, to the final Warthog run to call back to Combat Evolved, lines of dialogue to mirror earlier conversations, and the final scene between Chief and Cortana that ends the story in the same way it started all those years ago. Now don't get me wrong, I'm really happy the Halo series kept going into the future, because looking at where the story is today, I'm more excited than I ever have been to see what's next for the Chief. But nothing will ever take away from how beautiful a conclusion this was for those first 3 games, and how emotionally satisfying it was to finish this fight. Best platformer I've ever played, which might sound like a hard statement to take seriously since it's, you know, a SpongeBob game, but that doesn't prevent it from having the tightest controls and best level design across the entire genre. It's got massive open world environments that are a blast to explore and reward exploration, with many spatulas off the beaten path for you to find. It's got music that perfectly encapsulates the atmosphere of the area you're exploring, and goes way harder than it has any right to in some instances. Like, could you tell me that was from a SpongeBob game if you didn't know any better? And of course, the controls are literal perfection. The fluidity and responsiveness of every character's movement is unmatched by anything I've ever played. The camera is completely in your control at all times, and it's just as responsive and intuitive as the basic movement controls. And that is the core of what makes this game so much fun to play. Immaculately refined controls both in terms of character movement and camera movement that permeates all 3 main playable characters. I'm thrilled beyond belief that we got Rehydrated in 2020, because it was able to bring even more attention to such a masterpiece of game design, having been met with such overwhelming praise, and giving it a faithful remake after years of wondering if we'd ever get something of this scale. That it's finally getting the spiritual successor that it always deserved. And now, for our champion, the game you already knew was going to be in the top slot from the moment you clicked on this video, but one whose praises I'll never pass up the opportunity to sing. There really isn't anything I could possibly say about this game that I didn't already cover in my video from November of 2020. That video is my proudest creation and the best analytical work I've made on this channel to date. For as much of a cop-out as it may be, if you really want to know why I love this game as much as I do, and why it's so objectively well designed, your best option is to watch that video. But I'll run down the quick version here. The story is subversive, engaging, and satisfying. The music is orgasmic. The atmosphere is immaculate and still looks beautiful 2 decades later. The core gameplay has perfect difficulty escalation that rewards exploration but doesn't necessitate it. Swordplay and crossbow combat are both immensely fun to use. The essences all have a distinct and important role to play, and the levels are masterpieces of design, whether they're linear or open-ended. It is an absolutely outstanding video game that goes above and beyond in every fundamental aspect of game design and storytelling, and one that gets absolutely no attention from the gaming community at large, which is a crime. If you want to know more, go watch my video about this game, and hopefully it will convince you to play it for yourself, because if I was only going to recommend one game on this list to you all, it would be this one. And it is, without a shadow of a doubt, the greatest video game I have ever played, and I don't think anything will ever be able to knock it off its throne. And there you have it, the cream of the crop, the 20 best games I've ever played with a few honorable mentions to boot. I would wholeheartedly recommend you check out every game on this list you haven't already played and wish you the best time possible if you do decide to give them a shot. But now, the time has come to ask, what are some of your favorite games of all time? Are there any underrated gems you wish deserve more attention? Anything that you think got snubbed from this list? Let me know in the comments. And with that, our journey through the best and worst of gaming has come to an end. I still plan on making a video going over the best and worst of films as well, but that'll be a little bit further out on the agenda. I've got bigger fish to fry first. Other than that, I'd like to thank you all for watching. Stay tuned for next time. I hope to see you all soon for whatever you decide to watch next. Goodbye!